Now, this conference takes up the important topics of enterprise, business, and morality under the nice double entendre of business matters. Indeed, business does matter, for without the organized, systematized approach to creating and selling goods and services, the great many needs and wants of a growing world could not possibly be met. Work through enterprise is the normative way individuals rise out of poverty and care for the basic needs of their families. But can work and enterprise have a richer meaning for us than the riches it brings to us? And can it be a way to discover or live out a spiritual calling? And how would our work be different if we saw it for more than its utility? These are the great questions that we will raise and discuss throughout the day in what I expect to be a dynamic, engaging global conversation.
That economics, at its most fundamental level, is not about money. At its most fundamental level, it's about human action. It's about human beings making decisions based on the information that they have at their disposal on how to utilize those scarce resources to benefit themselves and their families and, of course, their societies, their communities. How we answer these big questions: who am I? Why am I here? Where did I come from? What is my purpose? Where am I going? What is man? Which is, of course, the question posed in the 8th Psalm. These questions have an enormous impact on the way in which we're going to construct our societies and indeed our businesses, including the question of how we buy and sell things, how we trade, with whom we trade, how we treat those with whom we trade, and how we ought to direct our activities, to what end. So the matters that we are called upon to ponder today are indeed ponderous and important, and not just theoretically so, but practically so, because our destiny is placed in our hands by our Creator. He who has given us the talents to make the world better expects us to be intelligent, industrious, generous with those talents, to see the people with whom we collaborate, other human beings who share a common dignity and a common vocation and a common destiny, because we share a common origin, that each of us are called and entrusted with these talents, and we will have to render an account for what we have done with those talents. And my prayer is that each of us will hear the Master who has entrusted us with those talents say to us one day, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast proven thyself faithful in small matters. Now enter into thy Master's joy."
There was a study done of a mainline denomination on the East Coast, and over 500 sermons were analyzed. And in those 500 sermons, only 2 had workplace examples. And so although that we are at church maybe 100 hours a year, we're at work a couple of thousand hours a year minimum. And the 2 aren't connected very well. And he shows us a pattern of taking chaos and bringing structure and calling it good. And I have not come up with a job yet, whether it is unloading a dishwasher or being CEO of a company, that is not taking chaos, bringing structure, trying to call it good.
So a few years ago, Harvard's Michael Porter made a bold prediction, a bold statement. He said an idea of shared value, this concept that suggests that business's aim shouldn't just be profit, but also purpose, that this idea would reinvent capitalism. Now, we have plenty of data today that suggests there is a very high correlation between purpose and profit, proving that when organizations get their environments right or their structures right, that they flourish and everybody wins. So purpose is not necessarily a new concept, I don't think, for us here, but it is gaining momentum. If you haven't noticed, in the last couple of years, I don't think any of us can pick up a business review without reading something about the power of purpose, whether that be as a way of increasing employee engagement, lowering employee turnover, or as a way of speaking to millennials. Every organization probably has some sort of North Star, guiding light, purpose statement, vision statement. Yet many are still struggling with how to enculturate that and how to sustain that. And their people are not making a connection between their work and that purpose and how their work contributes to that purpose on a daily basis. So I think we're really talking more about a how-to question now around this idea of purpose in the workplace, not so much whether we have a purpose statement as an organization, as much as it is about how are we operationalizing that.
The private company Mars is doing a really neat study, and they've dubbed it Economics of Mutuality. And they have some tests where they are running, if you measure people, planet, and profits, will you do better than if you're only measuring profits? And so they are trying to show with data how having a more holistic bottom line is better for the long run.
And that was that upper quadrant. That was that good to great quadrant, that purpose clarity quadrant. Those companies with high purpose are solving, a societal need, and they're rallying people around that calling. And the data is now in that's showing that those organizations are the sustainable, high profitable, high performing organizations that have great culture.
You can't just be an entrepreneur once, in a sense. You have to continually be an entrepreneur. And we've talked a little bit about this. What are some of the things you're doing right now that are making you feel entrepreneurial again, making you a little nervous, taking risk, keeping you up at night?
Yeah, well, I mean, we went from just my wife and I to 200 employees in 9 years. And it wasn't, there wasn't a big leap anywhere in there. It was just sort of this constant stream of growth. So I would say every year since we started, it's been like starting a new business, because you're sort of having to rethink every structure that you've put in place. People that you put in certain positions need to be moved around. I mean, it's a very kind of complex, ever-changing organism when you're going through that kind of growth.
What's the purpose of business, and where does profit fit in it?
Yeah, I don't think the purpose of business is profit. I don't agree with Friedman on that. I think that profit is necessary for business to exist. I think it's a indicator of whether we're doing the right things or not. I think it tells us what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. It's the engine that helps us to grow and exist. But I don't know. I just think that's a shallow way to think of business, which is really a community. I don't know, it creates social cohesion, it creates goods and services for people.
Obviously, AutoCam grew certainly beyond belief, I think, because we had a purpose. As I've learned from the audience, the purpose of our business was actually improving fuel economy for vehicles. And so we grew as that business grew across the world, and it was a great motivator for our people. And it really taught me a lot about the meaning of having a purpose when you're doing a business.
We convened a group of men in the shelter, and I had an outside facilitator. I didn't have any staff present because I didn't want any vengeance if somebody said something that they didn't approve of. And I said, what do you want Guiding Light to be when it grows up? And after 3 or 4 months, we had notes, and everyone was invited. They came back and said, I want to be part of this community. I want to be empowered. I don't want to be enabled. I need structure in my life. I need to make sure I have a drug-free and alcohol-free environment. Now, for me, those are some of the foundations of work, and those are the foundations of business. This year, we'll put over, so far, this fiscal year, we've put over 800 individuals back to work.
I want to challenge what might be somewhat of a misnomer that entrepreneurs are businessmen. I'd like to maybe suggest that entrepreneurs are really just problem solvers. And business is one medium that they've chosen to solve those problems. Along life's journey, I found education to be kind of a target-rich environment for problem solving. And that's partly what attracted me to education. Milton Friedman said two things that kind of have stuck with me over the years. And one was, if we want to see any meaningful improvement in public education, we have to privatize it, because only through privatization comes competition. Competition always does two things. It drives up quality and drives down cost. Those seem to be the two biggest challenges we have in public education today. Stanford University has a center called the Center for Research on Education. They came out with a report that validates that our students are excelling far beyond the normal expectations for students. So the districts get $2,782 more per student per year than what an average charter school will get. Based on that number and the fact that we educate somewhere around 37,000 students just in Michigan alone, we operate in 9 states, but just in Michigan, that number is over $100 million in savings to the taxpayer just in the current year.
And through that point, I came across a couple of folks in New York who were trying to solve a very particular problem. And it was the pollution that comes from food carts. So I don't know how many of you have been to New York recently, but there are 5,000 food carts selling hot dogs and coffee all throughout the city. And they're one of the biggest contributors to nitrogen oxide and particulate matter in New York. New York has a higher than average asthma rate. And part of it is because these Honda generators that are on these food carts are just sending fumes into the air. So the city council came to us and said, can you fix this problem? So I said, okay, that's real value. I'm going to create an environmental solution. But the problem, as you might guess, is no one wanted to pay for it. So it's not complicated to create a more environmentally food cart, but it's not going to pay the bills and you won't be able to get investment to do it. So when I took over as CEO, I said, okay, well, we'll create a new business model. We'll solve a bigger problem, one that I think people will be willing to pay for. And through that process, we will also solve the environmental aspect of what happens with mobile food. And as I worked through the system in New York, I realized that the real economic problem here is that people want high-quality food that is safe, where they don't have to suck fumes when they come in and purchase from it. And they want it to be on a beautiful platform, but that platform doesn't exist. And both, big national brands and local entrepreneurs would be willing to pay for this solution if it was an entire package. So we designed and built an environmentally friendly food cart. When I go back to our conversation with Dunkin' Donuts, this was going to be a multi-million-dollar deal where we were going to provide this platform for their 12,000 franchisees. And they said, well, we need a generator. Their coffee machines take up huge amounts of electricity. And I said, okay, but it's a diesel generator. It's going to kick out a lot of fumes. He goes, we're not sure we can do the deal unless it has a generator. So I went back to my team. I said, guys, this is going to make or break our company. It's going to be a multi-million-dollar contract. What do we do? And everyone looks at the value statement and says, we started as an environmentally friendly company. If we do a diesel generator now, what's the point of us being in business? It would have been so much easier to just take it. I really didn't want to say no to this big corporation. So instead, what do? The value statement forced us to be innovative. Luckily, we live in Michigan. We drove out to Detroit. We found out the guys who built a lithium-ion battery for the Prius. We said, can we put that battery into our cart and make a purely electric, zero-emission cart, despite the incredible electrical draw that's necessary for these coffee equipment? The answer is we can. It's going to be a little more expensive, and it's going to be a lot of hard work, but at least we didn't violate the core and the spirit of what that company was. And when people need meaningful work, I think they need to know that their values of their company and their individual values are aligned, because otherwise that creates stress. And I think ultimately that's the opposite of value creation.